A warm welcome to each and every one of you. I'm Karen Donfried, GMF's president. It is deeply meaningful to have so many friends, acquaintances, and admirers of Guido join us to remember and celebrate his remarkable life. How lucky we all were to have known Guido and to have been touched in whatever way by his grace. Were it not for Guido, GMF would not exist. Guido was the one who inspired the government of Willy Brandt with a vision for how best to mark the 25th anniversary of the Marshall Plan, and the German Marshall Fund of the United States was born. GMF, to this day, is a testament to Guido's creativity, Guido's humanity, and Guido's ideals. Guido was deeply involved with GMF until his death. His engagement with and commitment to GMF and to us, GMF's people, extended far beyond attending board meetings. He visited GMF frequently, both in Washington and Berlin, nurturing his relationships and eager for the latest programmatic updates. And he shared his other passions with us. To take just one example, in May of 2018, Guido organized 2 buses to take GMF staff to see his exquisite Central Asian ikat textiles on exhibit at the Textile Museum and Sackler Gallery, lucky recipients of prized parts of his collection. And then he took us all out for dinner at the Tabard Inn. That was Guido. For me personally, Guido was a wise mentor who became a treasured friend. All of us who were lucky enough to bask in the glow of his friendship can speak to his singular generosity and thoughtfulness. He would always ask about my family, long before he knew them well, remembering the names of my husband and children, not only because he cared about me, but because he cared about them. Guido's love embraced us and expressed itself through the many ways he shared his passions with us, whether through invitations to the Alvin Ailey Gala at the Kennedy Center each February, or by the arrival of the annual Kreuzkam Christstollen each December at our house. That was Guido. And during his last weeks, Guido would say to me, "Karen, don't be sad. I have lived a very good life." Up until the end, Guido was looking out for me. That was Guido. Today, we want to share as full a picture as we can of our founder, our inspiration, and our friend, Guido Goldman. And as you know, Guido was amazingly multidimensional. Let's start with a conversation with Martin Klinkst, Guido's biographer. Welcome, Martin.
Hello, Karen.
Congratulations on this masterful biography, which will come out next week.
Yes.
You chose to entitle the book America's Mr. Germany. What are you capturing in that title? And how is it that Guido came to be so engaged with Germany?
Well, thank you, Karen, and thank you for participating in this wonderful event to honor Guido. And you know, Guido's parents were brought up in Germany. So Guido was surrounded by German literature, music, and as well as masterpieces of European art. And, you know, the delicate Meißner porcelain was taken down when guests came to dine with his parents. So he was brought up in a German environment. So this was part of his history. And though, you know, the atrocities of Holocaust were a ubiquitous presence in Guido's life and in his family's life, they were not the determining image of Germany. So his parents had actually another picture of Germany before World War II, and they spoke highly of German culture. So this was partly why he was brought up, you know, in a German surrounding. But still, he always said it didn't come natural to him. So it took a long time. You know, he went to Germany the first time when he was 22 in 1959 to spend a semester in Munich as a student. And his experiences with Germany were not all good. And he, you know, just to tell you a very quick anecdote, you know, at that time when you drove along the German country roads, there was a big, you know, poster or billboard showing the outline of the German Reich, Germany before 1937. And after the World War, parts of Germany, you know, were given to the Soviet Union and to Poland, and Germany, and the center of Germany was divided into the West Germany and East Germany, the German Democratic Republic. And so this was three parts of Germany. And there was a big billboard saying, Germany divided in three parts, never. And Guido said, well, this is German, this is nationalism. And what is it about? And with an American friend, he printed a little, you know, pamphlet and stuck it to the billboard saying, where is the third part of Germany? And he was caught by the police and fined. And he thought that was awful. So, so his first experiences with Germany were not that good. But then he came back to Harvard, and then Karl Kaiser crossed his way, you know, young professor who, you know, actually installed his German curiosity in Guido. And Guido then was still searching for a subject, also for his master thesis. And he was, you know, interested in the Soviet Union. He was interested in Africa. But then he met Karl Kaiser, who, you know, taught German politics, and he met Henry Kissinger. And then he started with the German research program. And then he worked with Kissinger to start also the West European studies that then became the Center for European Studies. And so it went on. Sometimes he said it was by serendipity, because I was sometimes a lazy student, but I was also a multifaceted student with many interests, but no specific interests. And suddenly Germany came along, and so it was.
So Martin gets huge credit for this biography as the author. It was Michel Müntefering, Minister of State in the German Foreign Office, who had the original idea of commissioning a biography of Guido. And she made it happen in the context of the year of German-American friendship. So let's hear from her now.
Dear friends, maybe some of you know the seeming giant in Michael Ende's novel Jim Button. The closer you get, the smaller he becomes. Guido Goldman was the opposite of a seeming giant. The more you learn about him, the taller he becomes. That's how I felt when I got to know him. Guido was an enabler. He enabled people to get to know each other, meet and exchange ideas. To achieve what he has achieved, you must have many talents. Guido was a brilliant intellectual, a talented communicator, an attentive listener. And many of us also witnessed another of Guido's talents, to become a dear friend. I still remember when we met for the first time in the Parliamentarian Society here in Berlin. I will never forget Guido and Karl, his best friend, coming down the stairs, two perfect gentlemen. Years later, and that was one of our last meetings, we had lunch at Boston Harbor in one of his favorite fish restaurants. He asked me, as always, a lot about German politics, persons, party developments, topics. That day, I felt he left me with more questions than answers. That was exactly the moment I had the feeling that his story had to be told. You all know that the book about Guido's life is being published now. I'm convinced it's important to know about his story. Back in Boston, it wasn't clear if his memories would be written down. He was way too modest to seek the spotlight. I knew I would need some partners in crime. On my way back, I thought if I could convince Karl, Guido would finally be won over. And so he was. The book project became very dear to his heart. Guido was very much looking forward to the publication, and he also saw the cover image, which puts it perfectly: America's Mr. Germany. I will never forget his wisdom, his humanity and philanthropy, and I'm sure whoever had the luck to know him will neither. Dear friends, I'm sure the transatlantic relationship will have a prospect future if we all learn from Guido, because the closer we get, the more important we become to one another.
Thank you so much to Michelle Montefiore for inspiring this biography. Martin, talk us briefly through the book. How did you approach Guido's life?
Well, it was not so easy, because when I met Guido, it was not, he was telling me first about his, transatlantic bridge buildings. And I thought the book would be about this only. But the more I got to know him, the more I understood that his life is much broader, that he has a lot of interests, that his interests are, in ikat, in those textile business, that he was also a big, supporter of the American Ailey dance theater. So it was, this huge interest. Sometimes it sounded like it's eclectic, but the more I got into his life, I saw that he built bridges. That bridges, not only transatlantic bridges, but he built bridges throughout his ICAT engagement to the Uzbek society. For them, the ICAT is very important. And he helped, also to create new jobs in this business because of his support, and that he made it public, and that he, brought it to museums, and that people could see that's a piece of art. He built bridges to the African American society by supporting Alvin Ailey, by supporting the people in Alvin Ailey. So at the end, I think, the common thread of this, at the first view, eclectic engagements, I saw that there is a common thread, and this is bridge builder. This is bridge builder.
And in writing the book, what did you discover about Guido that surprised you?
Well, actually, many things, but actually also a lot of things that influenced from his childhood on. And especially, I would like to share a story. Shortly before he died, we talked on the phone just a couple of days before, and he talked about, how much the book means to him, and that a woman called Ruth from Barbados played such a central role also in his life, and that I, put her also in a prominent role in the book. And Ruth from Barbados was his nanny when he was a child. And she opened his eyes to the injustices, because the Goldman family was living in an apartment building, the Upper West Side, and they had two elevators, one for whites only and one for colored people and the rest. And when Guido was always, together with Ruth from Barbados, who took him to different events and meetings, he always had to take the servant elevator that was for colored people. And when once he went out with his parents to the opera, came home, and his parents took the normal first elevator, and Guido ran to the second one and took that one. And his father was very upset and said, "Guido, you're stupid, what are you doing?" And he said, "Well, father, that's always the elevator I take with Ruth from Barbados, and you are so engaged, you know, for Jewish causes, and you should also be engaged for human rights causes for African Americans. So his father actually, you know, stopped segregation of elevators in this apartment building. So this was, you know, those human stories that meant so much for Guido and his upbringing, and also for his later engagements. I think that was really what surprised me, and the abundance of people that he helped, people from all walks of life. And, you know, people from the Alvin Ailey Theater, people from university, and he never wanted to be in the limelight. He always, you know, didn't make a fuss about it. He just wanted to help. And this was so amazing about him.
So Martin, for you, what are the key takeaways from Guido's life?
Well, I think that there's always a greater cause than yourself. I think that you can do many good things and even better things without actually, you know, staying in the limelight, without actually being known. I mean, when I first met Guido in Harvard in 2006, I didn't know anything about him. And I was walking through the Center of European Studies, the beautiful, amazing building, actually the most amazing building in all of the university. So, and I thought, well, and I asked who you know, just donated the pictures on the wall. And they said Goldman. And I said, well, who is sponsoring this and that scholarship? Goldman. So it was, you know, I thought, well, this Goldman must be really a big guy, but there was no sign on the door, you know, his name was never mentioned. Even only if you asked, then you heard about Guido Goldman. So I thought, this is amazing. And, you know, he's a doer, a patron. He was a philanthropist and a people's man, and a fisher of men. And I think this is what I take.
Thanks so much, Martin. With that overview, we want to explore some of the chapters of Guido's life. Harvard played such an important role. His experience there was formative. He came to love the university as a student and never left. We want to share with you a video of remarks that Dr. Henry Kissinger gave at a 2018 celebration of Guido's role in preserving the ikat textile tradition. Dr. Kissinger was Guido's doctoral advisor at Harvard, and Guido told me more than once a story with relish about how Dr. Kissinger encouraged Guido to finish his dissertation as he was nearing the 10th anniversary of having begun his doctorate. And apparently Dr. Kissinger said to Guido in his gruff voice that he did not have double-digit doctoral students. The two of them became lifelong friends. Following that video, we will turn to Dr. Karl Kaiser, Guido's best friend from their years at Harvard. You'll remember Michel Müntefering having referred to Karl as the key person to convince Guido, a humble man, as Martin just underscored, that her idea of commissioning a biography of Guido was a good one. And Michel was absolutely right to turn to Karl. Karl will moderate a conversation highlighting both Guido's leadership at the Center for European Studies and his support of the McCloy Fellows at Harvard. So let's go to those now.
Guido had an unusual capacity to understand the essence of the political moment, of the historic needs, and to my extreme fortune, good fortune, of my personal needs. So, over the decades, at every important turn in my life, Guido showed up. In all these years, he never has asked anything for himself. He's never asked me to fundraise, to speak for him, to do a favor for a friend. He'd show up from time to time to tell me about people he thought I should get to know, because they might teach me something. And occasionally because he thought I might teach them something. But still, in all these years, I cannot remember that he ever asked anything for himself or for any of the activities in which he was engaged. And so I'm here to congratulate you, to honor, because you're honoring Guido, who is one of the most selfless, thoughtful human beings I have ever met. Who is one of the most selfless, thoughtful human beings I have ever met.
Guido was an extraordinary person. My friendship with him goes back half a century to the time when both of us worked for Henry Kissinger, whose testimonial you've just heard. Guido had the extraordinary ability to connect with people. He could listen, he understood, he was discreet, and he helped. And he applied his really amazing negotiating skills to whatever cause he supported. And thus he became a builder of institutions and of bridges across national borders, very much in the tradition of his great father, Nahum Goldman, who broke the taboo of relations between Israel and Germany, the country of the Holocaust. Among his many causes were the relevance of Europe to the United States and especially Germany. And he devoted much of his life to these causes. And almost all of them started actually at Harvard University, where he spent most of his life. Some began here and flourished outside, like the German Marshall Fund, or later on the American Institute for Contemporary German Studies. But the majority actually stayed at Harvard and developed right here. And among them, the Minda de Gunzburg Center for European Studies is no doubt the most important one. But besides that center, there were others, such as the German Research Program, the European Excellence Initiative, a professorship, fellowships to foster exchange between Europe and the United States. But the center was the most important contribution to Harvard. And I call on its present director, Grzegorz Ekiert, who's a professor of government at our university, of Polish origin. He is the 5th director since Guido created the center. So Grzegorz, the turn is yours.
Thank you, Karl. Thank you very much. We are here to celebrate an extraordinary life. The life well lived, eventful, and hugely consequential. The life that touched thousands of people and made big difference to many. I met Guido in the mid of 1980s when I was a graduate student, communicating in broken English and living in the basement of Child Hall. Guido invited me to become a part of CES, and this has been my home for over 30 years. Guido founded the center 50 years ago, and it was not a self-aggrandizing project, as many centers are, but it was the labor of love. the love of Harvard, the love of academia and intellectual community, the love of students, and the love of Europe. Over 3 decades, Guido built a unique academic institution that shaped Harvard, American academia, and transatlantic relations. Today, CES is the biggest and best endowed center for studying Europe in the US. The center is home to 13 members of Harvard faculty. It has over 100 faculty associates from Harvard and other academic institutions in Boston. Every year, it hosts some 30 visiting scholars, and it's home to 60 graduate students from all social science disciplines. It also has 10 people strong staff. Every year, CES organizes close to 200 events that feature over 300 speakers. It offers grants and fellowships to graduate and undergraduate students. CES also oversees the secondary concentration in European history, politics, and society. Since its founding, the center provided the space and resources for training hundreds of experts in European history and politics, who now teach at the finest universities in the US and around the world and provide advice to governments and businesses. The center hosted hundreds of scholars and policymakers from Europe and built a dense network of academic exchanges and friendships across the Atlantic. The center, through its support of European studies, introduced thousands of Harvard undergraduates to European history, politics, and culture. This is Guido's legacy, and it will bear fruits for decades to come. We will treasure it, safeguard it, and build on it. And as in the past, every director of the center will ask herself, what would Guido think about this? Would he support what we do? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gregos. Guido rightly thought that the exchange of young, promising academics, future opinion leaders, and America would be absolutely central for the future of the relationship with Europe. And therefore, he played a very crucial role in creating several fellowships, the John F. Kennedy Memorial Fellowship for postdocs, and the McCloy Fellowships for young, promising graduates, a sort of German version of the Rhodes Scholarship placed at the Harvard Kennedy School. And I'd like to call on 2 of those McCloy fellows, former McCloy fellows, Constanze Stelzenmüller. She is now the Fritz Stern Professor at the Brookings Institution, and a younger member of that group, Sergei Lagodinsky, who is now a new member of the European Parliament. Constanze.
Thank you very much, Carl. I unfortunately don't have the title professor. It's called the Fritz Stern Chair, but I'm still a senior fellow. So 1986 was the year I first met Guido at Harvard. I was part of the fourth generation of McCloys, and frankly, a very intimidated 24-year-old. I wouldn't have dreamed of engaging Guido in a longer conversation in those years. I just didn't have the courage. I was fresh out of law school. I was still disgusted by the inability of my teachers to speak about the role of lawyers as enablers of the Third Reich. And I was really happy to escape West Germany in the waning end of the Cold War that appeared to be trapped in morose self-contemplation and paralysis. Harvard and America were a liberation for all of us, and not least for us women. At home, we had been taught that we were never to be more than the inheritors of a post-war order created by others. And Harvard was teaching us now to think as founders, architects, and leaders, in other words, to act. It immediately became clear that public service, as Harvard understood it, was so much more than öffentlicher Dienst. And this was electrifying, and it was life-transforming. So much so that some of us stayed in America and never went back. And I probably only went back because of the fall of the Berlin Wall. I wanted to be present at the creation of a new post-Cold War order. 30 years later, the McCloy program will be 40 in 2023, and we have more than 250 alumni. We have to ask ourselves if we are not witnessing the destruction of order on all levels, international law, alliances, even our Western democracies. The events of the past week in Washington, D.C., where I've been living since 2014, are a case in point. And we McCloys have always been famous for fighting among ourselves at Harvard and back home about the nature of the mission that we were given. And the alumni register indeed shows how diverse our contributions are. But it seems to me now that there has never been a more dire need for public service and leadership and for building bridges across the Atlantic. I had the privilege of Guido's friendship and empathy for a decade and a half now, and that included very much the Kreuzkampfsteuern that Karen mentioned at Christmas. And I will miss him more than I can possibly say. But in these extraordinary times, it is the example of his life as a creator of institutions and as a bridge builder between people and countries that is more inspiring and meaningful than ever. And in that sense, we are all his students and his children. Thank you.
Thank you, Sergey.
Yes, well, it's a privilege to be here, and it's a privilege to talk and to remember Guido. It was a privilege to get to know him. What was Guido to all of us? What was Guido to me personally? Well, first of all, he gave us a chance. He gave us, the young Germans of various backgrounds, a chance for self-transformation. Because I think after the 2 years of McCloy, nobody, not a single one of us, was still the same as we came to America. So he was an enabler, but he was also a role model. And of course, just as Constanze said, many of us were hesitant to talk to him. He was too large for us, small Germans. But we still tried to imagine how it could be, how we could become Guido at some point. So he was a role model, and for me personally, and for many of us, he became a friend. And for me personally, he was also part of an imagined family. Me, myself, being from Russia, being of Jewish background, being of German background, being at Harvard, and being a product of a Cold War. And many of us were products of Cold War who were there. But many of us were, regardless of our background, also part of something very special, very difficult, and very tragic, yet also very inspiring and motivating. And this is the German-Jewish transatlantic discourse. And Guido was, in that discourse, the best of America and the best of Europe that this discourse ever could give us. And he was truly global, he was truly transatlantic, and he was truly mensch. He was a mensch, yeah? Something that in English has a slightly different, and in Yiddish has a slightly different meaning than just in German. So he was something that Europe, we Europeans, lost and found. But we found it not by chance. We found it because he decided that we should find him. He decided that he wanted to be found because of his intellectual and emotional generosity. It's not about money. It's about ability to change other people's life and the wish to change other people's life. And many of these lives, if you look at the McCloy program, the many of us, Constanze and myself, are just two of many whose life was never the same, because Guido at some point had this idea. So I saw many young German students who came, and I'm happy that they're becoming more and more diverse. And this is probably the best legacy that Guido gave to this program. The program was at the beginning quite white because Germany was the German elites were quite white. But now I see, and I'm happy to see, so many young people of different and difficult backgrounds who have a chance, who become some part of this story. So with Guido, those Germans like myself and many others met yet another American, but not just yet another American. They met somehow also part of ourselves as Europeans, and a lost part of ourselves. And this was probably the best and the most important achievement of the McCloy program. And this remains the best, the most important achievement of a McCloy program, showing to McCloys, to us, and showing through McCloys and through us that America is not some alien nation, that America is also part of us Europeans, and we Europeans are part of America. And Guido is exemplified it the best, and we will carry him in our hearts and our minds for many years, and will maybe, if we try, become a little part of a new Guido, of a collective Guido of all of us.
Thank you, Sergei. Guido, during the last months of his life, greatly worried about the future of American democracy, as I'm sure many of us did and still do. And it was one of the great moments of joy for him, just a few weeks before he died, that the autocrat lost the election to Joe Biden. The events of January 6th, the storming of the Capitol, he did not witness, but I'm sure he would have been pleased by what the Congress did last night or yesterday. Let me conclude by saying that Guido leaves a lasting imprint on all of us who have met him or who had the privilege to be his friend, but he leaves an imprint through his creations. They will last, and in that sense, Guido has made, on a number of issues, the world a better place. We'll now turn to a biographical photo montage of his life. It is set to the music of Rock My Soul in the Bosom of Abraham. It's taken from Revelations, the major piece of his beloved Alvin Ailey dance company.
That was amazing. For those of you not familiar with Rockin' My Soul in the Bosom of Abraham, that African-American spiritual was meaningful to Guido because it was the triumphant finale of Alvin Ailey's Revelations, a dance masterpiece that many of us enjoyed watching time and again with Guido. From his passion for the Alvin Ailey American Dance Company to his exquisite ikat textile art collection, Guido loved the arts. You will now hear from Judith Jameson, the Artistic Director Emerita of the Alvin Ailey American Dance Company. And she has said that Guido spoiled me silly when he served on the Ailey board. You'll also hear from Bruce Bagantz, co-chair of the Board of Trustees of the Textile Museum here in DC. Guido left many of his favorite icots to that museum. So now let's go to those videos.
He just did so much for so long for the Alvin Ailey American Dance Theater and the entire organization. Guido served 2 decades on the Ailey Board of Trustees starting in 1993, including as vice chairman for many of those years. During his board tenure, Guido was an ardent advocate for dancer safety and wellness, ensuring that the company always tours with a sprung floor and a physical therapist. Guido cared about the dancer, the person that was inside, not just how exquisitely talented they were, but who was that person? And he cared about that person. He traveled extensively with the company in the US and internationally to places like China and France and Germany, of course. And thanks to him, Ailey too performed at the 2008 reopening of the US Embassy in Berlin. Guido also played a key role in preserving the legacy of Alvin Ailey and the company through the creation of an Ailey archivist position, the collection of important oral histories, and the digitization of archival materials. Guido enthusiastically supported Ailey's annual galas and major campaigns to establish an endowment and build a permanent home for Ailey, the Joan Walsh Center for Dance, where the physical therapy room is named in his honor. Every arts organization and artistic director should have a friend like Guido, who welcomed us into his home to mark special events and celebrate milestones.
It's a pleasure to speak with everyone today about our inspirational friend, Guido Goldman, and his Central Asian ikat textile art collection. My name is Bruce Begans. I'm the chairman of the Board of Trustees of the Textile Museum in Washington, D.C. Each of us know Guido as an exemplary international leader, benefactor, and institution builder. A lifelong devotee to the arts, in 1975, Guido was introduced to Central Asian ikat textiles, the art form which employs an ancient, sophisticated resist-dye technique to create vibrant abstract patterns and dazzling colors. Guido subsequently became a passionate collector and went on to build the world's premier Central Asian textile art collection. His devotion led to preservation, education, and a widespread public interest that was key to the modern revival of Central Asian ikat technique and design. In the late 1990s, a stunning exhibition drawn from Guido's collection traveled to 6 major U.S. museums. Guido's collection generated what is recognized as perhaps the best textile art book ever published on a single textile collection, the award-winning ikat, The Silks of Central Asia, the Guido Goldman Collection. In the universe of textile arts, Guido was honored with the highest awards. The 2016 Joseph V. McMullen Award for Stewardship and Scholarship in Islamic Textiles, and in 2018, the George Hewitt Myers Award for Lifetime Achievement in the Textile Arts. Guido Goldman's ikats are now in collections of 12 U.S. museums. His final major collection donation was to the Textile Museum, to which he donated his personal favorites. All of us deeply miss our friend, Guido. Thank you.
Guido was a deeply loyal friend. We will now hear from one of his dearest friends of 50 years, Marie Warburg.
Some personal memories about Guido. My friendship with Guido goes back 50 years. Guido was visiting my father in Hamburg when we first met, even before I moved to New York to study medicine. Obviously, our patients had developed a desire. They wanted us to get married. But Sex in the City was not for us. We loved each other as friends, and I still do. A lifelong friendship evolved from there on. On average, we had about 3 phone conversations per week and many get-togethers when my family had moved to Concord in 1994. Guido was an extraordinary person. In his often caustic sense of humor, he would say that it was due to his very dysfunctional immediate family that he was able to learn how to lead his own life successfully. Guido had a very large and diverse circle of friends in many countries. He was caring and generous with any friends who were in need of support, whether it was advice or financial support. Some of his friends described Guido as a Renaissance man. I disagree. One thing was missing amongst his numerous wonderful attributes. He was not an adventurer and lacked any heroic attitudes. On the other hand, he was constantly searching for roots, and I pride myself for luring him back from moving permanently to Florida to staying in Concord. Guido was surrounded by friends in an aura of affection, care, and solidarity until his very last day. Guido loved his friends to be close by. It is at his request that some of us obtained burial plots right next to his in Concord, including myself. That was many years ago. In the end, we will still stay neighbors forever. Some friendships never end. Guido will be sorely missed by many. Thank you.
One of Guido's many marvelous features was his voice. And I am thrilled that we have a recording of a podcast I did with Guido back in 2007 about the creation of GMF. I know that hearing his voice and his humor and his modesty will make you smile. Let's listen.
His name was Alex Miller. He was very powerful, and he was the finance minister. And my father, who was a leading Jewish statesman, knew him well. And I asked Father if I could have a meeting with Miller. I had met Miller once before. He arranged it. And I went and made my case of that something should be done on the 25th anniversary of the speech, that this historic speech of General Marshall at Harvard. And he said, what did I have in mind? And I said, an endowment for the Center for European Studies. And he asked me, what would that cost? And I said, $1 million. And he said, how will we respond to the Marshall Plan with $1 million? And I wasn't quite sure where to go with that. And I said, what do you mean? He said, well, that's a ridiculously small amount of money for a gift to thank the American people for the Marshall Plan. Why don't you come up with something that would be significantly larger, and then we can talk about it. You come and see me again, and I'll take you to Willy Brandt, and we'll see if we do it or we don't do it. And I said, well, what amount do you have in mind? He said, 250 million marks. And I said to myself, that's one scotch too many, and left cordially and thought, that's that. This was not going to happen. 250 million marks out of a conversation like that. So that was the origin. That was the first time this came up. He then came in January, this is now January 1971. He came to, February, came to Washington. The German ambassador was Rolf Pauls. I knew Pauls very well because he'd been the first German ambassador to Israel. And he was a very cordial man, very easy to deal with, and invited me to a dinner for Möller. And he said Möller wanted to have a tete-a-tete with me in the beer hall or the beer room or whatever, beer cellar of the residence. It was the old residence, subsequently burnt down. But and so I go down to have this meeting with Miller, and he said, "Well, how's the plan developing?" And I said, "Oh my God, I really haven't done very much with that." I said, "Well, I'm working on something that should be a living memorial." He said, "What's a living memorial?" I said, "Well, it should be a fund." And I was winging it, I have to say. And I said, it should be a fund. It shouldn't be a building, a statue. It shouldn't be an endowed professorship or something. It should be something that really has a kind of continuing dynamic to it. And actually, at the back of my mind, the first thought was maybe a fund that the Germans would provide that major foundations could apply to for European American kind of projects. And he then said, well, it sounds possible or interesting, but I need something in writing. So I then wrote it up. And I have to say, I can give myself credit, it read pretty well in English and terribly in German. And I mean, it was so heavy in German because my German isn't good enough. I mean, I spoke German before English, but I can't really do that kind of sort of subtle writing. And it was pretty heavy-handed. And we kept getting somebody to try to mend the German, and then it wasn't quite right. And eventually I had something which we sent to him, which he then sent to Brunt. That was the origin.
Guido not only was GMF's founder, but he kept GMF close to his heart and core to his life for the next 48 years. Guido was the longtime chair of GMF's board, and even after he retired from the board in 2012, he continued to attend as many board meetings as he could in his role as chair emeritus. I want to share with you tributes from Robin West, GMF's current board chair, and from Mark Leland, who served on GMF's board for over 30 years, much of that time as Guido's co-chair. And Mark was a close personal friend of Guido. Let's watch those videos.
Guido Goldman was much more than the founder of the German Marshall Fund. He was the soul of the German Marshall Fund. He deeply admired Germany, the United States. He felt very strongly about transatlantic relations and the survival of liberal democratic values. Guido and I also talked about the Marshall Plan, which we both agreed was probably the best example ever of enlightened self-interest by any country. So Guido did more than just think about this stuff or care about this stuff. He actually acted on it. And he created GMF. And when I say he was the soul, he was deeply invested. He spent a lot of time with members of the staff. He read papers. He visited the office. Guido really was instrumental in building GMF and tending the flame of GMF. And 50 years later, more or less, it is now a large and quite substantial nonprofit organization that is influential on both sides of the Atlantic. It just couldn't have happened without Guido, not only starting it, but really making sure that it met its full potential, which I think it is doing now. So to Guido, we salute you with both admiration and affection for all that you have done for GMF and for transatlantic relations. So many thanks.
To sum up my life with Guido in 2 minutes is like asking me to sum up all of Shakespeare's plays in 2 minutes, but I shall try. I won't talk about the Center for European Studies, which he really built and raised all the funds for. You'll hear that otherwise. I won't really talk about the German Marshall Fund and how he was the founder and really the only person really responsible for the fund. That you can learn from others and from the book. I will talk about what Guido did for me. He introduced me to the German Marshall Fund. I had never heard about it. When I was leaving the Reagan Treasury, they needed a Republican, and Guido came first of all to me. And of course, when Guido asked you to do anything, do it because it's worthwhile. And I did it, and I spent 8 years and then rotated off. And 2 years later, he came back and said, go on again because we have this extraordinary new president, Craig Kennedy, and you will really enjoy the experience. And I spent 20 years with Craig, and I did enjoy the experience. And then when Robin and I were chairing the search committee for a new president, we knew that Guido definitely loved Karen and wanted her. And surprisingly enough, through our search, we came out with Karen, and we're very, very proud of it. But most of all, I'm proud of a friendship I had with Guido. Guido, myself, George and Lois de Menil, and my wife spent so many hours together of just listening to Guido, telling stories, sometimes over and over, but they were always interesting and they were always fun. We had birthday parties together. I gave some for him, he gave for me. He always sent flowers to my wife wherever we were in the world. He would find out and flowers would be arriving. So all I can tell you is, as a friend, there's no one like Guido. And for any of you who are fortunate enough to know him, you should be very proud of it because it was a great experience to be a friend of Guido, as I was. Thank you.
I now want to welcome my colleague, Kevin Cottrell, who is the Guido Goldman Director of Leadership Programs. Guido followed with enthusiasm our work focused on cultivating the next generation of transatlantic leaders. When he stepped down from the board in 2012, creating a named directorship, the only one at GMF, seemed the perfect way to honor him. Kevin, I'd like to ask you to share your thoughts about Guido.
Thank you, Karen. It's an honor to do so. And like many of us who've served on the GMF staff, I do consider one of the great privileges for us has been the opportunity to meet, work, and to know our founder, Guido Goldman. Every single one of us appreciated his unique kindness, his wry humor, but I think most importantly, he had a deep and boundless curiosity about a wide range of subjects and people. And we heard a lot of that today. And so there, I wanted to pivot and really reflect on Guido as the leader. And not only was he, nurturing and helping GMF along across many different programs, and my colleagues all have had similar experiences, but I think with respect to his leadership, it was clear to each of us that Guido was a man who made a commitment to live a life full of purpose. And he did so with a really deep love and care for others. And that has been echoed by so many comments today. From his leadership, Guido embodied the idea that a leader is someone who's about passion. It is not about the position or title in which they hold. And I think this is really important when we think about GMF's work in this vein. Many times over, he really highlighted to us as an individual how an individual has the agency and can, and if they choose to influence positive change in the world. GMF is just one example of that kind of leadership that GMF demonstrated. And it's a significant one. It's a historical one. But what made Guido truly exceptional was his delight and his generosity in nurturing this very same capacity in others so that they too would find their agency and seize their inspiration, their passions, and really deploy it to the positive good that they could lead. And it is in this spirit that GMF will really continue to find and nurture more exceptional value-centered leaders on both sides of the Atlantic. Indeed, I think it is our special call to action with today's memorial. So thank you for that, Karen.
Oh, many thanks, Kevin. As we thought about how to mark Guido's passing and all he has contributed to GMF throughout his life, we decided it would be fitting to name our boardroom after him. Beyond our board meetings, this is the room in which all of our public events in Washington take place. Once we resume in-person convening, every invitation we send out will invite our network to the Guido Goldman boardroom. Guido was a firm believer in the power of personal relationships and networks to advance the cause of transatlantic relations and transatlantic cooperation. So we are thrilled to remember him in this way. Please visit the online condolence book for Guido if you haven't yet done so. I hope you will contribute. I know you will love reading what others have written about Guido. The link is in the description just below this video. I want to thank my amazing colleagues, Suda, Corinna, Zach, William, Andrew, Marcos, Jennifer, Shannon, Brandon, Laura Hope, Nicola, Elizabeth, and Jamal for all their work on today's event. Thanks to all of you for having been a part of this celebration of Guido's life. I know we will all hold the causes he believed in close. The English version of Guido's biography is due out this spring and is entitled Guido Goldman, a Transatlantic Bridge Builder. For my part, as I traverse that transatlantic bridge, I will work to make it ever stronger in Guido's memory. Now, to conclude this celebration of Guido's inspiring life, let's go out with Rocka My Soul.